fighters as an extension of its other activities. It's probably not surprising, therefore, that they also built the largest flying boat to see service during the Second World War. This was the BV 222, powered by 6 massive radial engines and called the Viking. This is the prototype, seen in its civilian colors. It was first ordered by Lufthansa as a long-range airliner to service the North Atlantic. But its military potential was quickly recognized, and like the Focke-Wulf Condor, was soon pressed into service. It flew transport and reconnaissance missions from Norway to North Africa. Although few were built, it gave surprisingly good service. Because of the number of engines, it had 2 flight engineers. The first engineer is sitting between the 2 pilots and adjusting the throttles. The second engineer sat behind the other crew at an elaborate console which gave him the vital information about each engine's performance. Helmut Rödig was Blohm and Voss's chief test pilot and a man who brought a great deal of flying boat experience to a company that concentrated heavily on producing these aircraft. He would also have seen the project shift from a civilian to a military one. In later models, the lower of the craft's 2 decks would have accommodated machine gun positions, and there were 2 upper turrets. Despite this defensive fire, Vikings often employed escort fighters, because the Luftwaffe was slow to take risks with an aircraft the size of the 222, and the cargo it was capable of carrying. The Viking's wings are of particular interest because they were formed around a main spar which was over 1 meter wide and also acted as a support for the engines themselves. The hollow spar occupied such a volume, it was logical to turn it into fuel and oil tanks. As big as the Viking was, there was one still larger flying boat produced by Blohm and Voss in the wartime years. This was the Model 238. It employed many of the features of the 222, but was actually 22 feet longer. Indeed, it was bigger in just about every dimension. Because the risk of building a plane this size were considered so great, Blohm and Voss commissioned a 1/4 size flying model to test its characteristics. You can see some indication of its scale from the workmen. There was even a tunnel inside the wing which enabled them to get to certain parts of the engine when the plane was in flight. From certain angles, the 238 actually resembles one of the many ships produced by Blohm and Voss. There was only one ever produced, and it took 14 months and some 600,000 man-hours to accomplish. They also made the jigs that would have been necessary in a large production run, something that Blohm and Voss had anticipated. If the plane had gone into mass production, they calculated they could turn out a hull in about 8 weeks. So perhaps hundreds of these aircraft, with their 6 diesel engines, could have been available had the war continued. The 238 would have been more heavily armed than the Viking, offering a greater level of protection from Allied fighters. Certainly the Luftwaffe must have considered this giant flying boat a viable proposition when work first started in January 1944. By the time the aircraft was completed in March of 1945, the war was already lost. And perhaps, tragically, so was the sole example of the 238. The largest flying boat to fly in the Second World War met its fate from the blazing guns of Allied Mustangs. It was destroyed just 4 days before the official end of the war. By any standards, it was a major engineering accomplishment. And that this was achieved during a time of great material shortages and while Germany was being bombed day and night speaks volumes of the ability of the Blohm and Voss team. As it happens, none of the Luftwaffe's warplanes ever reached North America. although it's very clear that they had a number of aircraft capable of doing so. By the time they came into service, the war had taken another direction, and the fatherland needed defensive rather than offensive aircraft. It's a moot point, but one is prompted to question what might have happened if more of the German war effort had been put into developing conventional but massive aircraft like the Tu-38, which could have taken the conflict across the Atlantic to American soil.